Welcome to Ideagen TV. Today we have with us Dr. Chantal Line Carpentier from UNCTAD in New York at the United Nations. Chantal Line, welcome.
Hi, George. How are you?
You know what, Chantal Line, we're always great when we see you on Ideagen TV because you're right at that nexus. You're right at the tip of the spear, as they say, on changing the world. And my gosh, does the world need change?
So yes, it does.
We are all, optimistic. We're hopeful. We're all working really hard to connect the dots. And you're right at that center where the United Nations converges to change the world. And so diving right into the interview, Chantal Line, how have you seen countries and governments implement innovation into their mission to help the progress towards those global goals, those 17 global goals of the United Nations?
Yeah, that's a very good question, George. And there's two parts to that answer. I'll take it in two parts. So the first one is, as you know, countries they're not mandated, but they're all very keen to produce voluntary national reviews. That's basically a review of what is it that they're doing to achieve the SDGs within the country, and they do consultation. And what we find, and those are all available on the UN website at the High Level Political Forum, is that what we're seeing now after 6 years of implementation, we're seeing that there are some very interesting committees and commissions and measures that are being put in place by our government to actually accelerate SDG implementation. Let me give you a few examples. So for instance, there's a series of innovative governance measures, such as to remove the silos among ministries, which is preventing us from actually achieving the SDG in an integrated way, because we all know they're all interrelated. Through, for instance, interministerial committees or commissions. Many of them, such as in Bangladesh or Morocco, are actually ensuring full accountability by having these interministerial committees or commission respond directly to the heads of states of these governments. And on top of it, they're using other mechanisms, some of them already existing, such as National Roundtable on Sustainable Development or such committee. Many of them are multi-stakeholders, so they bring the government, the business, the NGOs, and others to actually share in terms of how they will implement the SDGs. And many have specific ministries that have been nominated by the heads of state to basically lead the advancement of the SDGs. So there's no fight in between the ministries and trying to go forward and to coordinate and report against advancements on the SDGs, but also, George, in making sure that we leave no one behind. So there's a lot of these innovative governance structures that are being put in place. We're documenting them. And every year, the UN, our colleague at UNDESA, produce a synthesis report that summarizes all of these innovative and measures, but also other policies they're putting in place. So I invite people to look at those. But what I would also, the second part of my answer is how countries are actually using science, technology, innovation to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs. And to do that, as you can imagine, it's related to the previous answer, because you have to see what your national implementation, what your strategies are, and then as part of that, how is STI helping you to implement the strategies? And as we know, pre-COVID-19, more than 100 countries, and we documented that in our World Investment report, more than 100 countries and territories had modernized or revived their industrial policies in light of two things: the fourth industrial revolution and the need for greening the industry. And so to account for, we all know that we documented 11 frontier technologies. And to make sure we talk about the same thing, I'm talking about artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, the big data, blockchain, 5G, 3D printing, robotics, drones, gene editing, nanotechnology, and solar PV. And basically the crisis has accelerated this digital transition, and capturing and creating value along new, shorter digital supply chain of the future, because we saw how our supply chain has been disrupted by COVID-19. So now we want them to be shorter and more resilient. especially for MSMEs, micro, small, medium enterprises that have been hardly hit by the lockdown. It will become even more important in post-COVID-19 to do this and to help micro, small, medium enterprises to take advantage of these shorter, more resilient supply chain using the digital space. Strong entrepreneurial and innovative capacity at the firm level are also essential for this digital transformation. But as we know, many entrepreneurs need our support to master digital transition so they can keep on playing their important role to ensure a more rapid recovery. And the reason why they help with the rapid recovery is because small, medium enterprises, depending on countries, create jobs for 70 to 90% of people. But most countries are realizing thus that they need STI to be part of the integral part of achieving their national development strategies. And as I mentioned, they include it in their voluntary national reviews. And to ensure that they can deliver on 2030 agenda through this global vision of people-centered, inclusive, and sustainable society. Just to conclude, George, some of the government and businesses are seeking to maximize the environmental gain from digitalization while minimizing and mitigating environmental costs, right? So for instance, in Thailand, Thailand is issuing an STI policies to enhance the capacity and competitiveness of their private sector in the value chain in 4 industries: agriculture and food, medical and wellness, bioenergy, biomedical, and biochemistry, and tourism and creative economy through this biocircular green economy model. And we at UNCTAD, we've been receiving an increasing number of requests to support developing countries as they review their industrial policy, their science, technology, innovation policy, entrepreneurship policy, trade policy, and to review them all in one systemic approach, because each of these pieces need to be integrated and talk to each other. So for instance, we completed last year STI policy reviews for Ethiopia, for Panama, and Uganda. And we provided support for government to integrate policies for science, technology, innovation in their national development strategy. There's also other actors out there very active. So the African Union has adopted the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa 2030 to spur innovative, inclusive, and sustainable growth in Africa in a partnership with the World Bank. The European Commission has issued Shaping Europe's Digital Future. It's a digital strategy document that aims at supporting technology in a competitive digital economy, an open, democratic, and sustainable society. And they prepare new legislative framework for digital market and services. And so, as you can imagine, there's a lot of activities happening. And increasingly, to conclude, we are developing core indicators for not just the government to report against their advance in achieving the SDGs, which they do through these VNR. And these indicators has been developed by the Statistical Commission of the UN with the head of the Statistical Commission of countries. But we took that and basically said, how can we then disaggregate that and basically have business be able to report against core SDG indicators that are based on accounting principle and can be aggregated back at the national level and the international level, so that in these VNR, these voluntary national reviews that country prepare, they can also include the contribution of their private sector, and who knows, eventually also their NGOs and their different groups.
You know, Chantal Line, it's just awe-inspiring to hear your description and sort of the analogy and the entire process where you sit at UNCTAD. What an incredible place to be within the United Nations, where it's truly the place where everything comes together, where you can see the impact and you can see that critical nexus, right? And yes, I imagine that you're also able to see where the gaps are, which is critical.
Yes, and that's our job. George, UNCTAD was created to help developing countries in 1964 when we were created, to help them take advantage of the economic and financial system identify the gap, why they're not taking advantage now, they can't, and then help them collectively through international cooperation to be able to take advantage of this global financial and economic system.
And I think what's even further more inspiring is the fact that since 1964, we're in this fourth industrial sense of revolution, right? It's a moment of incredible change, especially obviously from a technology standpoint. And what you're describing is the evolution of UNCTAD. You're still more relevant than ever in your mission.
I believe so.
But that's really what is so incredibly inspiring, is that having, begun in 1964, clearly the mission was to help those developing countries. Okay, fair. But as the world changed and as technology has evolved, you're still focused on that. You're still focused on helping those that are maybe falling behind leap to be at least at the same point as the rest of the country. So it's an incredible thing. And wow is all I can say. I mean, the word wow is apropos here. Wow.
And George, what we need is those countries to catch up. There's no reason why we should have extreme poverty in 2021. Right. There's enough resources, there's enough innovation, technology for all of us to not have to live in extreme poverty.
So well said. So well said, Chantal Line. And so we saw that back in February, UNCTAD released a report on technology and innovation. Would you be able to share a little bit about the report with our global audience?
Yes, thank you so much for asking. This is a great report. And, I'm biased, but I recommend anybody to look at that report. It's called Technology Innovation Report 2021. And its title is Catching Technological Waves, Innovation with Equity. And what we do there is to look, based on what we just talked about, at how developing countries fare in this fourth industrial revolution. And what we find is that the frontier technologies we just talked about, right? The AI and the machine learning and 3D printing and nanotechnology are the main force defining the world today. And the COVID pandemic is a vivid example of deployment of artificial intelligence and big data to screen patient and monitoring the outbreak, tracing cases, predicting its evolution, and also in the development of vaccines. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is COVID-19 has also demonstrated our technical solution using digital technology. Though it can benefit marginalized group and those further behind, also risk leaving many behind, such as the poor around the world in any countries, but also those in developing countries without connectivity. We've seen that a lot of developing countries, UNCTAD does develop e-readiness assessment. So that's the ability of a country to take advantage of this developing digital space. And what we find is there's lack of skills, infrastructure, and financing in these developing countries, many of them, to actually take advantage of this frontier technology market, which are expected, George, to grow very rapidly. They stand at about 250 billion in 2018, and we expect them to reach 3 trillion by 2025. So that's in 4 years from now. That's huge. And the central point of the report are that we are at the early stage of this fourth wave of technological change, which has implication of historic proportions. All country needs to understand what is happening, get prepared to catch this wave of change and ride it forward while ensuring that no one is left behind. And a novel aspect of the report is what we develop is a technology readiness index. So we have the e-readiness assessment and we have a technology readiness index that assess the national capacity to use, adapt, and adopt frontier technology in an equitable manner. And what we find is that countries that overperform have invested in innovation and technological learning through a stronger R&D effort than average. No surprise there. But what is a little worrisome is that even the top performing developing countries, the higher ranking on this technology readiness index, are still way lower ranking for ICT connectivity and skill than developed countries. And the problem here, George, is that there's very few countries, i.e. two, China and the US, that create the technology that drive this revolution. But all countries would be affected by it. And almost none of the developing countries we studied for the technology innovation report are prepared for these consequences. So what we find, the key trends here are inequality between countries is increasing, but within country inequality has increased as well. And not only in developed countries such as the United States and several European countries, but also in developing countries such as China and India. And the impact of technological change is accelerating this inequality trend. So based on our analysis, we're recommending in that technology innovation report that country build stronger national science technology innovation capacities, address the gender gap in science and technology, something that Ideagen and UNCTAD have in common, adopt redistributive fiscal policies to compensate for those that winner takes all type approach, secure equitable access to education, lifelong learning and training for all, because the level of skills that is needed in this fourth industrial revolution is way higher. And countries that could go by basically having cheap labor and be able to market themselves on this will no longer have this advantage as we're moving in further in this fourth industrial revolution. And we find that international cooperation, you will not be surprised, and inclusive dialogue will be indispensable to address the aspect of frontier technology, such as the lack of consistent ethical framework for technology like artificial intelligence and gene editing, to give an equal voice to developing countries in governing the impact of these technological changes on our societies and the planet, and to come together with policies to smooth the technological transfer and adaptation to these changes. And just to give you an example, UNCTAD has developed a partnership with China with our science technology and logistics division to basically help young scientists from developing countries to train them through a South-South cooperation, so we can actually upgrade their skills to be ready for this fourth industrial revolution and wave. But I really invite everyone to read this report. It's dense, but it's very powerful.
Can folks find the report on your website?
Good question. Yes, all UNCTAD report. We are a open source UN. All our report are free online. Just Google UNCTAD, TIR 2020 UNCTAD, and you'll find it.
Beautiful. And we highly encourage that advice to be taken to read this report. It sounds incredible. And what it sounds like, Chantal Line, is that while you're seeing increased inequality in countries, that you have reason for hope because now you know where the issues lie and therefore they can hopefully be addressed. Does that sort of summarize?
That's a good way to put it, George. Actually, what we do in that report is to look at the previous tree revolution and see what happened, and then draw conclusion from these trees, so we don't get ourselves into further inequality in this one. So we have a chance to actually catch up this time.
That's right. That's just indispensable work. It's just invaluable on so many levels. And as we near now the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, which is preparing the 24th session, what are you looking forward to, perhaps as the biggest takeaways?
Well, there's going to be several things. One of them is going to be how we all come together to actually, now that we know what are the culprit of this increased inequality, and we have some policy recommendation, the CSTD is the UN intergovernmental body on science and technology for development. And this is where the government of the world come together, the science, technology, innovation ministries. And so it's having that discussion with them on what is it that we do now? How can we help each other? We basically, this is a forum where we share best practices, lessons learned. We provide foresight about trends in STI and key sectors of the economy, and drawing attention to these emerging technologies, among others. And then basically we make recommendations, George, to the UN General Assembly, to ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council. UNCTAD also produces two reports of the Secretary General, one on science and technology innovation for sustainable development, and one on ICT for sustainable development, that help inform that debate and then get discussed through the CSTD. But we also want to look at how can we leverage the digital technology to design specifically to address the SDGs. So this idea of mission-oriented approaches as a practical way to provide directionality to innovation activities. So we want to look at that and help countries set priorities and define appropriate mission for their ministries, their various ministries together. Because it remains a challenge, especially in a crisis like this, for policymakers to start identify their mission and then prioritize and then look at their national strategy and see what type of versatile digital technology can help them. And as you know, as I mentioned earlier, we do science, technology, innovation policy reviews. We have right now, George, a major issues. And let me just go through this quickly. So we have the digitalization of the economy on the one hand. And there the problem is that 50% of the population, 3.7 billion people, don't have digital connectivity. 3.7 billion people do not have access to these internet that we can do this interview now on. So we need to solve that problem, right? Because that means that there's a lot of young people, and actually 369 million of them, without access to digital access. This means they don't have education right now, and they can't find a job, and they're being left behind. So this is the first problem. Then there's the second part of this revolution, which is the data-driven one, based on big data and Internet of Things and others. And there, it's an even more steep slope for developing countries, but there are ways to help them to use these technologies to advance the SDGs, especially in the areas of access to water, sanitation, energy, and other area, education and health, for instances. And so this is what we're going to be talking about at the CSTD, the Commission on Science and Technology for Development. And I hope that Ideagen will be able to join us.
Absolutely, and 100%, especially based on the description and the work we know that you're doing each and every day as the innovative leader that you are, Chantaline. You're leading, you're connecting the dots. As someone, our chairman emeritus says, connect, and nurture the dots, right? That's what you do each and every day. Dr. Ken Moritsuga, we have to cite him on that because that's the wisdom. But I'd like to ask you one of our closing questions, which is, so you're an innovative leader. What do you believe is or are some of the most important traits to be an innovative leader, to help develop and foster and further innovation across the planet?
That's a very good point. I think, for one, you have to be open-minded and curious, right? I think that's the basics. Then I would say surround yourself and listen, not just have them around, but listen to people that think differently, come from different sectors and countries and allegiance than yours, because that's the way, at least that's the way I cross-fertilize ideas. I get something in a completely different environment and then say, oh, well, that could be applicable there. And then that brings this idea there. But also, and as you know, George, because we're both alike this way, we like to catalyze and put people in different areas together that can do bigger things together than each of them individually. And I think what we need to do is to aim to collaborate and co-create instead of starting something from scratch all the time. I swear there must be hundreds of initiatives on water and hundreds of initiatives, if not thousands, on energy. And we need to work together and bring all of these pieces of the solution, either institutional innovation or technological innovation, together to solve this big problem. And this is another point. I think oftentimes when we talk about innovation, we think about these high tech, like these frontier technology. Many of them are institutional innovation, they're business model innovation. So we need the whole thing to be able to get there. I'm a firm believer that, and you heard me say that before, George, that we have the solution to every single problem we have in every 17 of the SDGs. The key is to make people work together, and wherever I'm weak, somebody like you can complement. And then if I have a battery, but it doesn't store energy long enough, that somebody has a better battery for my innovation, that we can together get to this solution. And the final thing I'd say is always ask yourself which vulnerable group may be left behind with the proposed measure, mechanism, or policy that you have. Because we cannot afford to create or roll out technologies that are not inclusive and leave people behind. So I'm a firm believer in the bottom-up, pro-poor, frugal innovation, where we're at the UN, we have a network of economists, and we're looking at new economics for sustainable development. So they include the green economy, blue economy, purple economy, orange economy, as well as the yellow economy. But we also have in there social solidarity economy, circular economy, and frugal innovation. And we're putting all this together to see how can we put them together to form the building block for a new economics for sustainable development.
Speechless because you've just, described so much of what is needed on the collaborative front to create those critical solutions. Like you said, all of the answers to achieving the 17 global goals are out there. It's a matter of bringing people and these organizations and the ideas that are working together from a cross-sector vantage point to be able to say and sail into 2030 and say, we achieved the global goals. And that's really what leadership like what you're bringing to UNCTAD as chief in New York are doing. You are changing the world, Chantal Line. We're watching it because you have the leadership with your team. You're leading, you understand this cross-functionality that's so critical. And so as a closing question, what is your call to action for our global audience to continue to build a more sustainable world?
Well, let me see. You may need to stop me because I have a few, but I'd say, let's not reinvent the wheel. We have our framework. We have the SDG framework. Let's start with that, right? Let's try to advance those. Second one, we cannot afford to waste another crisis. We have $17 trillion of stimulus packages out there right now. They must be directed to this new economics for sustainable development and aligned with the SDGs, not in stranded asset, not in the whole economy that doesn't deliver for all and for the planet. We also need to focus those stimulus to those most affected by the pandemic, that is women, youth, micro, small enterprises. So we can't lose these people and leave them behind. What else? I mean, our Secretary General, George, has literally put 6 action agenda out there that I'd like to share with you, I think, in response. So he's basically, in support of what I just said, relaunch the economy in a durable and equitable way, aligned with the 17 SDG and the Paris Agreement, right? And then a new social contract based on investment in education, decent and green jobs, social protection and health systems. So this social protection floor that is needed. The third one, we were talking before this interview, George, this inequality in access to vaccine, the fact that we will not get back to a normal economy, though it sounds like it right now. But when you look at what's happening in India with this new super variant, we need to support the COVAX funding gap. We need to give money to the COVAX fund, which has been created with the WHO, to actually ensure that everybody in the planet has access to a vaccine. So we stop these variants. And the WHO head has basically said that we could stop this whole pandemic in 4 months if we work together and ensure that we fund this COVAX fund and we actually ensure everybody has access to a vaccine. We need to reduce extreme inequality, according to Secretary General, through basic solidarity taxes and more progressive taxes, to reverse the downward trend in concessional financing. Instead of helping each other and giving a loan to the poorest country on the planet, we need to give them as grant the money, especially now that they're having no fiscal source of revenues. As the trade is decreasing and foreign direct investment is decreasing, remittances are decreasing, they don't have the money And as a result, their sovereign debt is increasing, and we're heading directly in a sovereign debt crisis that will set us back 20 years. So we need to help countries to also solve their debt crisis. I think I'll stop here. There's probably a lot more that I could say, but the other thing, George, is belief. Each one of us can make a difference, and the SDG won't be achieved unless every single one of us do something, and we can all do something that has a meaningful impact on the SDGs, and we just can't wait for somebody else. We got to do it ourselves, together, and now.
And that is the last word, Dr. Chantal Line Carpentier, Chief at UNCTAD in New York. Thank you for all you're doing to change the world. We're honored to have you on Ideagen TV. Where can folks go to find out more online? What is the best website to find more information?
Actually, if you go to UNCTAD.org, you will have access to all in the tab COVID-19. You have a lot of this work. If you go to our publication, you're going to have all our flagship report, where a lot of the report that we discuss are there. The high-level political forum website from UNDESA, where you can have each country's voluntary national review, but also the synthesis of all the countries that present in a year. Usually there's 40 of them that present. So these are all good sources.
Well, we're looking forward to celebrating achieving the global goals, in large part thanks to your leadership. Chantal Line, thank you.
Thank you, George, and yours.
Thank you.